Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Okay, so I know it's late, it's been a long day, but I could get a better good evening than that. Good evening, everyone. Ah, thank you. Well, it is so wonderful to be here tonight and to see all of you here in the space for what I am sure is going to be a enlightening evening and a really wonderful conversation and dialogue. My name is Dr. Kyan Connor, and I am the director of the Center on Race and Social Problem in the School of Social Work. I'm also a professor and endowed chair and the associate dean for justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in the School of Social Work. The Center on Race and Social Problems has a mission, and that really is around better understanding and dismantling the drivers of racism and oppression. And we do that through rigorous research, scholarship, and practice. We also are very passionate about being able to bring in speakers and authors and scholars who can talk about these critical issues. And I am sure that the topics that we're going to cover tonight are going to be important. And I'm sure that you're all going to want to engage with our scholars and moderator as we go forward with the evening. I would like to thank all of the varied partners that have worked together to get this event here. The David C. Fredericks Honors College, the Center for Civil Rights and Racial Justice, the Department of Religious Studies, and the Office for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, all working together to bring this important event. And I'm going to read this very extensive bio now for our guest. So please forgive me if I get a few of these legal terms a little bit mispronounced. SpearIt is an internationally recognized scholar and teacher and is a professor of law at the University of Pittsburgh School of Law. He is the author of American Prisons, a critical primer on culture and conversion to Islam, and his most recent book is entitled Muslim Prisoner Litigation, an Unsung American Tradition, which examines the history of Muslim prisoner litigation through the lens of outcrit jurisprudence. As an instructor, SpearIt has taught a range of courses in the law school curriculum, including evidence, criminal procedure, criminal law, sentencing, corrections law, and professional responsibility, among many others. He has taught at a number of law schools, including St. Louis University, Seattle University, Texas Southern University, the University of Arkansas, and Gonzaga University. In addition, he has taught undergraduates as an instructor of record and taught at San Quentin State Prison. SpearIt graduated with a BA in philosophy, magna cum laude, from the University of Houston. He also earned a master's of theological studies at Harvard Divinity School, a PhD in religious studies at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and a JD from the University of California, Berkeley School of Law. Currently a contributing editor at Jotwell Criminal Law, he also serves on the American Bar Association's Corrections Committee and serves as an affiliate faculty at the Center for Security, Race, and Rights at Rutgers University. That is a mouthful. Wow. So we're so excited to welcome him, as well as our esteemed moderator for the evening, Brock Bahler, who is a teaching professor and director of undergraduate studies at the Religious Studies Department at Pitt. A faculty member since 2014, he teaches a variety of interdisciplinary courses, including philosophy of race and religion, philosophy of religion, science and religion, and modern and contemporary Jewish thought. He is the author of 3 books, including the editor of The Logic of Racial Practice, Explorations in the Habituation of Racism, and is currently working on a co-authored book on race and religion to be published with Cambridge University Press in 2024. Thank you both so much. We are excited to learn more. And without further ado, I will turn it over to you, SpearIt.
Right, thank you. Thank you so much. Can you all hear me? Can you all hear this? Well, okay. Thank you so much, Dean. I am very appreciative of that introduction. I'm a little embarrassed actually from that, but I appreciate it. Let me first start by thanking you all for being here, for taking time out. 6 o'clock, it's a Wednesday night, and so I really appreciate that you would take time and just hear some of my insights and share this book launch with me. I want to thank all the sponsors who have helped make this event possible. Special thanks to Nicola Foot, the Dean of the Honors College, Shayla Velez Martinez, who is the director of the center at the law school, who's really just been my backbone for a lot of this. And so I really want to say thank you for everything you do. And I also want to thank the crew who has been helping all of this come together. Ron Idoko, thank you so much for all of your efforts. Ginger White as well. Mary, Annie, thank you so much. Ian Kahende, who did a podcast with me last week, which is out. Thanks to him. And my RA, my research assistant, Izzy Presbury, is here, but he's out here collecting funds for the book. It's a strange thing, but we just thought it was easier for him to collect the funds out there based on, sort of just how things work at the school. So with that in place, let me just start by giving a sense of what the goal of this book is. I want to draw a frame for you so that we can have a sense of the very basic things that I'm after. The first thing is when I say it's an unsung American tradition, what I'm trying to say is that there is what you would call a living legacy happening right now. It's a legacy that's been going on since the 60s that's continuing till today. And so I want to highlight that legacy and really give a sense and try to make it clear that there's no such thing as a prisoners' rights movement in this country without Muslim litigants. Without Muslims, we don't have that. And so I want to underscore that and make sure that people recognize the contributions that Muslims have made to prison law jurisprudence. So that's the general frame. And within doing that, I want to make a couple of arguments. One religion argument, and the other one is more legal. The religious argument is to show that the reason there's so much litigation has something to do with the Muslim faith. In other words, the messages, the ideologies, the concepts, the stories from Islam are helping to push the litigation. And so I want to make that argument. So I want to make an argument that suggests that there's a causal relationship. There's causation rather than correlation. So when a Muslim goes to court to sue, you might say, oh, okay, it's a Muslim who's suing in court. I want to say that he's suing in court because he's Muslim. In other words, it's the religious ideas that give him authority, that inspire one to take up litigation. So that's the first argument. That's a religion-based argument to show the religious aspects of this movement. The second is to say that by engaging in litigation at this level, sustained litigation over decades, Muslims essentially have been upholding the rule of law and expanding the rule of law in prison. So imagine prison as a very lawless place, and over time, Muslims have been importing more of the rule of law, at least certainly in terms of the ideology. When we say the rule of law, Muslims have been helping more people be protected for more rights over time. And so that's the second part of the argument, is that our cherished ideals embedded in the rule of law are actually being propagated by Muslims in prison. Great. Okay. So let me start here with some of the book's themes, the main themes to be thinking about. First thing I want to mention is the Nation of Islam. This is where the movement begins. This is where it all starts. So it was Nation of Islam followers that really started litigating in earnest. And so we have to recognize that it was Elijah Muhammad, who was the leader of the Nation of Islam, who really brought out these ideas about justice and equality, centered the entire Nation of Islam around those ideas. And so in this story I'm going to tell you, justice and equality are central. This is the motivating force behind the Nation of Islam. And so I also want to mention that converts play an important role. In the history, in world history, when you think about converts, converts to a religion have done incredible things. They've built incredible temples and done remarkable things. And so converts are an important piece to this puzzle, fuel the process. Religion enters at multiple levels of analysis. Religion is all pervasive. So it's not just that the litigant is a Muslim. It's not just that sometimes they're litigating over religious issues, paraphernalia. Can I get books? Can I get a religious leader to come see me? But there's also conversion, and there's also the ideology that fuels the litigation. So at multiple levels of analysis, religion is coming into play. And so I'll lay some of this out a bit later. The book in its total points to a number of findings that I think this is one of the takeaways from the book to be thinking about, is that we see some very interesting kind of counterintuitive outcomes based on the litigation. And I will promise I will close that loop when we get there. So Islam in American prisons. This is really what we're talking about when we talk about conversion. Malcolm X, street hustler, pimp, converting. We see this. We see people who struggled with 8th grade English now teaching themselves Arabic. We see people educating themselves like Malcolm X. He read until he had to get his eyes hurt. He read the dictionary from A to Z and engaged in educating himself. And he changed. Remarkable. He said that his old ways fell off his way of thinking like snow falls off from a roof. Just let all that stuff go. Muslims in prison have faced special challenges. To begin with, just being Muslim, claiming that you're Muslim in prison in the early days would get you solitary confinement just by claiming Islam. And of course, there's lots of bias against Muslims in prison. Some of it is because the person is Muslim, but some of it is because I'm Christian. And I, as the guard, think I'm better than you. I have this superiority complex. So it's a dialectic. It's sometimes hatred and fear of the Muslim, and sometimes it's superiority complex. So religious persecution defines Islam in prison as well. All of this aggregates into what you would say is the Muslim will to litigate. Like it's an incredible disproportionality that we're talking about. And so I'll get to that right now, just to be thinking about some of these, what I'm saying, a legacy, some of these metrics. So just to get a sense, the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights on Religious Freedom in U.S. prisons found that Muslims submitted the largest number of religious discrimination complaints of any religious group, 2005 through 2007. They made the largest number of religious accommodation requests from 1997 to 2008, and initiated the largest number of federal lawsuits, 74 out of 250, between 2001 and 2006. And so while those numbers may not seem so dramatic, they really are. I mean, to say that 25 to 30% of all federal cases are Muslims is astounding, considering that on the outside, Muslims make up 1% of the American population. 1% of the American population, 30% of all federal cases. So it's a disproportionate phenomenon that's going on. And so less is known about the religious influence that has helped make this possible. So when you see these drastic numbers, for me, it was something that made me want to search why. How is it that it's so disproportionate? So this is some of the contribution I feel like I'm making in the book. And of course, we're seeing here Islamic attitudes. These are early images from Muhammad Speaks and The Final Call, which was the Nation of Islam's early publications. And you can kind of see what's going on here. The plans of Muhammad, the cry for justice. Right? And so the Quran abounds with references to justice that emphasize its central place in society. And it's a strong calling, right? Even against other Muslims. O ye who believe, stand out firmly for justice as witnesses to Allah, even as against yourself. So Muslims are supposed to stand up for justice even when it comes to other Muslims. And so the Quran is unequivocal when it comes to standing up to oppression, standing against tyranny, and looking out for the safety and the sanctity of one's fellow prisoner. And so those people who fight that oppression are likened to the grace of God, likened to a savior. And what is it with you? You do not fight in the cause of Allah and for oppressed men, women, and children who cry out, O Lord, deliver us from this land of oppressors. Appoint for us a savior. Appoint for us a helper, all by your grace. Believers fight for the cause of Allah, whereas disbelievers fight for the cause of the devil. So fight against Satan's forces. Try to imagine, and this is interesting because Malcolm X started out, and if you've read his autobiography, it starts out as Satan, saved, then savior. So he saw himself as Satan when he was in prison, and then he was saved by the Nation of Islam, and then he got out and became savior, right? And so try to imagine how that impacts someone's self-esteem, self-understanding. Here you are in prison at the lowest rung in society. You have to say people in prison tend to occupy that outcast, lock them up, throw away the key, society's forgotten people. So from that lowly position, you can become the grace of God. You can become a savior. So what this does for people's thinking is quite incredible. It's quite remarkable. One of the things that I kept hearing when I was interviewing individuals and corresponding with people in prison, Muslims who were sharing their insights with me, tended to all talk, and there's this saying from tradition that many people they hung their hat on that. And it's about seeing evil. When you see evil in the world, whosoever of you sees an evil, let him change it with his hand. And if he's not able to do so, then let him change it with his tongue. And if he's not able to do so, then with his heart. And that is the weakest faith, right? So this traditional saying has levels of protest. The first level of protest being when you see something wrong in your heart, in your head, you should know that's wrong and that's not right, and protest that. The next level would be to, hey, say something about that. Use your tongue. And then the most exalted thing you can do is to actually do something about it, right? And so this is a saying that many people in prison use to justify this activism, used to justify going to court and to authorize them to take action in this way. So, in these early publications, these are 1960s, early 1970s. So Nation of Islam had been publishing all sorts of prison-related articles and showing these images and literally thinking that Islam is the key to freedom. And in fact, Malcolm X says as much as that, right? He said, never had I learned to be so free as when I was in prison. He said sometimes months passed by and he didn't even realize he was in prison. So this idea that Islam is a key to set people free, both mentally and literally from the prison. So as the statements make clear, standing up for justice and standing against subordination is God's work. As the Quran describes, Allah commands justice, the doing of good. But on the contrary, there's over 200 admonitions against injustice in the Quran. So this is something that is real. It's something that people latch onto, and it's what gives people the authority and the inspiration to actually take up litigation. There's also the aspect of racial equality, racial justice that the Nation of Islam had really taken up, and others as well, not just the Nation of Islam. So for example, from the Quran, among his signs is the creation of the heavens and the earth. and the diversity of your languages and your colors, your skin colors. Verily, in that are signs for people with knowledge. So from this perspective, different languages, different skin color is a sign of creative power. It's a sign of creative power. And it's all divine as a part of the creation. Verily, Allah Almighty created Adam from a handful which he took from the earth. So the children of Adam come in accordance with the earth. Some come with red skin, white skin, or black skin, or whatever is in between, thin, thick, dirty, and clean. So this is an explanation for why we are different colors. Because the earth is of different color, and we come from the earth, so we're of different colors. O people, your Lord is one, and your father Adam is one. There is no favor of an Arab over a foreigner, nor a foreigner over an Arab, and neither white skin over black skin, nor black skin over white skin, except by righteousness. Have I not delivered this message? And try to remember, for an African American, for example, there's a long history with Islam, right? If you want to think culturally. So not only are we talking about some of the first slaves ever brought to this country came from a Muslim background, but we can, go back even further, the Moorish reign in Europe, right? The Moorish presence, 800 years in Spain, right? So that glorious history, and even going back further than that, when you think about when Islam was first getting off the ground, who got called on to call people to pray for the first time? Who knows this? Anybody? Who got called on? Yeah, so the Prophet Muhammad, who does he call? He calls an ex-slave, an African ex-slave, to come up and call everyone to pray. In other words, the Prophet Muhammad says, you are the purest, therefore you get to call everyone to prayer. And so right at the beginning, Islam has these egalitarian principles, and Prophet Muhammad saying nothing matters in terms of skin color and where you're from, caste, color, etc. By righteousness. That's what we're talking about. This is really what I'm trying to get at, this idea of Muslim litigiosity. It's a phrase that I've kind of put together. In other words, if I stand up here and try to joke and say, well, yeah, Muslims sue religiously, take it seriously because I mean it. This is the point of this lecture, is to show that they do sue religiously with religion in mind. Anybody know who this is by chance? Right? Anybody watch Duck Dynasty? No, no. This is an individual who's locked up in the Tucker facility in Arkansas, and the Tucker facility is probably one of the toughest prisons in the United States. If you ever watched the movie Brubaker, they had the Tucker telephone where they would connect an electric telephone to your genitals and dial up, and it's just so. Anyway, that the movie was based on this prison where he is, and he is, to me, the poster boy for my thesis. He's the poster boy because he's involved in all sorts of litigation. He won a Supreme Court case in 2015, which gave everybody in prison the right to wear a beard, half-inch beard. So this is one of the things that I kind of want to mention, is that Muslims have been litigating in a way that produce rights for everybody in prison. So all religious groups benefit from these efforts. And so there was no such thing as civil rights in prison until Muslims started litigating. In 1964, the floodgates opened up and we started seeing civil rights claims. Before that, there was no such thing as civil rights in prison. There was no such thing at all. Prior to that, courts held what they called the hands-off philosophy, or the hands-off doctrine, meaning we're not going to mess with whatever you do with those state prisoners. We just don't care. So for 150 years, federal courts had nothing to say about people in prison. Right? The other thing I failed to mention at the beginning, the lawsuits I'm talking about, they're not to try to get out of prison. This is not you fighting your criminal conviction from prison. This is not you fighting the duration or the fact of your prison sentence. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about improving conditions in prison. All of the lawsuits that I'm talking about are improving the conditions of confinement, misconduct by officials and staff, etc. This individual has multiple cases. He already won a Supreme Court case. He's got a sort of, he's on a terrorist watch list, so he's fighting that case. And very interesting is that he's actually suing the prison so that his group, he identifies as a Sunni Muslim, so that his group can worship separately from the 5% Nation of Islam, from the Nation of Islam, and other groups. Because right now at that prison, they just clump everybody into one. And so you get a sense of how Muslims get treated differently just by his litigation right now. Never in the history of prisons have Catholics had to fight to worship separately from Protestants. Never. It's still an issue now for our courts, right, to determine that. So he says those people are not who we are as Muslims, so we want our separate worship space. You do it for them, do it for us. But it's still not a reality yet. And I asked him one time, I've been in touch with him for a number of years, and I asked him, why do you do this? Why do you got like 4 cases pending? And why? He says, justice and the taking of power from oppressors who seek to destroy Islam by watering it down. Arkansas is still stuck in the plantation era, and a lot of my incarcerated brethren are mental slaves. Muslims do not allow their deen to be directed or co-opted by those who wish it to fit how they want it to be. Islam enjoins the right and forbids the wrong. So I have heard that so many times in so many closings and so many letters, Islam enjoins the right and forbids the wrong, right? So again, this is part of why people are engaging in this. And so with this individual and countless others, you see an aligning of Islamic ideology, action, and the rule of law. So what my book forces us to do is to reimagine religious expression, right? Reimagine what it looks like to express yourself religiously. So I come from, you could say a Hindu background for shorthand. And so when I go into the temple, it's very clear to see what's going on. Some people are ringing the bell, other people are waving incense, they're making offerings on an altar, and it's very clear this is all religious expression. My point is we need to expand what that can mean, because this is what's happening through legal action. People are going to court as a form of religious expression. And when I ask, well, why do you do this? It's my duty as a Muslim. It's my obligation to do this, to stand up for these people or to stand up against oppression. Right? So Muslim litigiosity, the idea of this phrase was to combine the idea of religiosity and this will to litigate, this will to take up your files and take your complaints and take them to court. So this is really what I'm trying to, sell you. Hopefully you're buying it. I did promise that there would be some counterintuitive findings. So my book, if you get to the final chapter, there's a number of findings that really push back against some of the common ideas that we have about Muslims in this country. The first thing I want to emphasize is really illustrated here in this middle picture, because we have a situation where the Muslim, the criminal, the convict, is following the law. It's following the procedures to get a case to court. It's doing everything by the book. So we really, and by doing that, helping to create prison law, helping to create American law. So American law is being created by these actions. And so when you see that it's the lawbreaker turned lawmaker, right? So it's like this juxtaposition that happens. And at the same time, the people who are supposed to be upholding the law and teaching the people in prison how to act within the law, committing some of the most heinous acts that cross the line into criminality all the time, as we can see from this. Very interesting fact, and you all make what sense of it you will, but there was a report, a government report that suggested, I forgot what the percentage was, maybe it was like 20% of all people in prison face very little time in sobriety. Does everybody understand that? They are there and they experience very little time in sobriety. So how are they getting high? How is this happening at this rate? I mean, you can only make so much pruno in the kitchen without getting busted. So how are people getting the drugs? The guards. And this happens so often, right? So again, law breakers into lawmakers, and then the people who are supposed to uphold the law look like criminals. This thesis also tempers ideas that Muslims are trying to install Sharia law and supplant American law and want to install the Quran as the new constitution. It's just wild, because when you look in prison, the Muslims there are creating American law and relying on law precedent so that they can make their case in the present. The individual that I showed, Abdul Malik Muhammad or Gregory Holt, his case, the 2015 case, the right to wear a beard, it's been cited dozens of times already. Other people using that case, right, to make their own claim. So, to think that, Muslims, for example, are any different from the Muslims outside of prison. The Muslims outside of prison are very happy to use American courts to sue for personal injury, family law, divorce, very content. I know lots of Muslims, no one has ever told me that they want Sharia law. I've just never heard that. Has anyone else heard that? Does anybody else have friends that has? So it's just hype, right? So this book is going to pushes back against that narrative. There's also, prisoner radicalization, the idea that Muslims in prison are radicalizing and engaging in violent jihad. They're, could be fertile soil for jihad. Is nonsense when you look at this litigation history, when you look at this legacy. So we had 3 congressional hearings about Muslim radicalization in prison. And we can only point to maybe one example of the phenomenon happening, and that case is very, very weak. So again, 3 congressional hearings and practically no examples of the phenomenon itself. So again, hysteria, just hype. And so my point is, that kind of jihad is not happening, but there is a jihad in prison, and it's happening through the courts. It's not sensational like the attacks of 9/11. It doesn't get media coverage, no headlines. It's slow, it's lumbering. It takes sometimes decades for one's case to get through the dockets. So it's a very nondescript, not on the radar. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about this jihad. The only kind of jihad that gets airplay is all the sensational stuff. And so again, it's very normal to take someone to court. In fact, there's probably nothing as American as that phrase, I'm going to see you in court, right? That's it. So, we are one of the most litigious countries in the world. The United States is. So it's very normative, very much in the box to take someone to court. So radicalization, kind of misses the mark, because this is a very normative thing to do in this country, which is to sue someone. The other point I want to make is shown by this illustration, which is, you have a case and you take your case to court, you're going to lose. And they know this. They know they're going to lose. I mean, just a tiny fraction of people get any kind of relief for these claims. And so you're going to lose, but the numbers keep growing. You're going to lose. People still keep marching to court to make their case. Now, why? When you ask that question, you'll see it's more about principle. It's more about my beliefs and what's right, less about the fruits of that labor, less about the outcome. They know they're going to lose, but they have to do it. Why? Because it's their duty as a Muslim. It's their beliefs as a Muslim that this is what's right. So I do want to underscore that part. I have to admit that there's a blind spot in my research as well, in this argument that I'm making. There's a blind spot because while I can talk about some individuals and how religion has inspired them to take action, sometimes it's simply because Muslims are treated worse than others. And how do I separate those? What is it? What can I do to separate that? It's very difficult. And so that's a difficult thing. And even within that separation, it's difficult because now, does this guard hate this person because he's Muslim, Black, ex-gangster? So there's a lot of converging forces that could cause that conduct, the misconduct by guards. And so I'm not going to overplay my thesis and say everybody's using the Quran and going to court. No, that's not what I'm saying, because some of it is simply because Muslims are treated worse than others in prison. Back when prisons first opened up, everybody got a Bible, right? Everybody got a Bible. To this day, Muslims are still litigating to get the correct translation of the Quran that they want. So just to get a sense of where we are. So again, this litigation may be a sign of who has it the absolute worst in prison, who has it the hardest. Finally, my last comment I'll make. Even with all the cases that I've looked through, all the people that I've talked to, all the research that I've done, I have to admit that it's not the full story. It's not the complete story. And the reason it's not the complete story is because prisons have a very unique power, which is the ability to transfer someone out of a prison. But what does that do is that it can sometimes kill your claim. Often it kills the claim. So I was reading through cases and I was like, wait a second, case mooted because, or dismissed on mootness because the prisoner has been transferred. So, okay, I'm trying to, okay, wait a second. So the legal claim just goes away because he got transferred to another unit? Well, how does this work? And I started learning about how certain claims, civil rights claims, can be dismissed if the prison transfers you. I was like, what the heck is going on? So the person's involved in litigation, and then the prison turns around, transfers that person, and the courts are like giving them a wink and saying that's okay. And so the courts work with the prisons to disenfranchise in ways that you can't imagine, from beatings to shockings to solitary confinement, all gets dismissed. And please, let me just take 1 second to kind of pull your coat on how drastic a transfer is, right? How drastic. You're taking someone's life and just turning it upside down. Any job that person might have held, an educational program, goodwill, other, sort of therapy classes the person might be taking, medical attention, mental health. I mean, so many things. Medication, the medication has to follow you to the transfer. So literally someone's life gets turned upside down, not to mention 3 or 4 days in between each transfer, and not to mention 2 or 3, sometimes 4 strip searches just for the transfer. And so it's a true weakening of one's legal case, and sometimes the case just disappears altogether. So I want you just to kind of get a sense of why I say we're missing some of the information, because those cases never get adjudicated. But I want to call your attention to the injustice of it, because you have this situation where this individual was wronged by the prison. And so you go and file a grievance, which really means you telling on your captors. You're going to tell on the people who watch you every day, day in and day out. And so what happens, a lot of times there's retaliation, cells get shaken down, extra strip searches. So just terrible treatment for trying to enforce the law. And so that's just the beginning. So you also get through all these legal hurdles that only people in prison face, PLRA, exhaustion requirements, etc. And so you finally get your day in court, right? And then what? Transferred. Now you're the new kid on the block all over again. Whole bunch of new people all around you. Terrible situation. So the person was wronged once, which caused him to grieve, right? And then got harmed because he filed the grievance, jumped through all these hurdles, finally to end up in court, only for that case to get kicked out. So there's injustice on top of injustice on top of injustice, and then the person who did the misconduct, the guard, is never brought to justice. So prison transfers that happen in this day and age in this way, it's about the most sort of nefarious 1-2 punch that you can experience in prison, that the courts and the prisons are working in tandem this way. All right, so we only know some of the problem. So I will stop here and say thank you so much for your attention and your kindness. I'll be happy to answer any questions or hear any comments. Thank you. Oh, we're going to bring the seats out here? Okay, we'll sit down now. I might still stand up. Okay.
All right, I'm Brock Bahler, and we really want to get you involved quickly. So I'm going to give just one question to get us rolling, and as I speak, and spend my have my 2 minutes in the sun here, think about what you might want to say, and we can use that microphone for you all. All right. So one of the things that, as I read the material you sent me and we listened to this today, that really hit me is how this is kind of a subversive critique to a number of recent surveys. Americans have been asked this question, or this, to agree or disagree with the statement, Islam is at odds with American values. And roughly half of Americans agree with that statement, that you can't be a Muslim and be an American. Or we should say it's a different way: to be an American is to be a white Christian.
Sure.
Right? And so quite the contrary, what you've shared us today is that the legacy of Muslim prisoner litigation highlights how they're seeking to uphold the Constitution, right? And are often motivated, but at the same time are often motivated to do so out of their Muslim values, right? And so they want to be identified as both Muslim and American. And so this reminds me very much of W.E.B. Du Bois' notion of double consciousness, right? And this experience that W.E.B. Du Bois talks about of the struggle of being a Black man in a world as the first Black man to get a PhD at Harvard, right? Yeah. To be constantly told that he's a problem. How does it feel to be a problem? And in a white supremacist society, his Blackness is perceived as un-American, as criminal, and notably then to be a Black Muslim criminal, you're triply perceived as un-American or as a problem that needs to be fixed. And I'm wondering how you see this kind of, right? And so as an act of resistance to that, Du Bois says, no, I can be Black and American, right? And so I'm wondering how this might be used as a frame for also illuminating the motivations or the desires at work, right? It's not with those who litigate, right? As a kind of subversive act to positively affirm their identity. And so as that kind of a politics of recognition, right? So I don't know if you could speak to that.
Yeah, excellent. So this there's so much in there, so it's great. I'm just going to say a few things, and hopefully it'll be responsive. When we talk about intersectionality in this country, right? The only reason intersectionality works is because we have a standard, and that standard is the white, male, wealthy Christian. Basically, that's where. And so as we take steps away from that, this is what it means to have intersectional identities that are oppressive. And so at the very bottom rung, we would have to say, if that's the top, then the bottom would be Black, woman, poor, Muslim, right? And so men just are like on the next rung, right? And so that consciousness is both in, sort of the guards, but, their mind as well. But we've seen this already. We've seen this in prison because, it's very interesting. In the 50s and 60s, they would surveil Muslims and eavesdrop and separate them by transfers, leaders, etc. So it was a very, talk about double consciousness, it was very interesting because Muslims were visible enough to oppress and subjugate, but they weren't visible enough to have rights. That's why they had to litigate. So on one hand, everybody saw the Muslim, and on the other hand, nobody saw them, right? So it's there. And in fact, it was that treatment in the 50s and 60s, which I like to suggest was a type of ground zero for Islamophobia in this country. A ground zero. A lot of people think it was post 9/11 that really, started kicked off the Islamophobia in this country. You can't imagine what was happening to Muslims in prison in the 50s and the 60s. Just read the autobiography of Malcolm X. You can get a little taste of it, but you have this situation where they were banning books and banning religious leaders and putting people in solitary and transferring leaders. So you had this situation where there was a playbook created. And when post 9/11 came, they did the same thing to Muslims. So there was a time, 2002, 2003. So you had 3 Muslim chaplains servicing the entire Muslim federal prisoner population, 3 for the entire country. So, it was a dearth, that it was a situation where you could see, but they had already mastered that playbook in the 50s and 60s. So again, I will say that, that was like a type of ground zero for Muslims in this country. And it happened years and years before. So yeah, I hope that was a little responsive to that. Thank you.
Anybody have a question? No, I do have a few more.
Oh, save me because he's got.
Really right after it. But one thing that really struck me was more when you were talking about sort of the perseverance involved in terms of trying to have one's civil rights recognized. How you think that to saying that it was wrong, but also part of the wrong sense of what's wrong. And I know we have a lot of students, both in law school and I have those undergrad students here as well, who look at all the flaws in the work, right? And are just open, right?
Sure.
We see these lawsuits being filed, the Supreme Court strikes them on grounds that we extremely disturbing.
Yeah.
What's the point? What's the use? And I was wondering if you could just expound on that a bit more generally, because while you're talking, I started to feel a bit more hopeful.
Oh, that's great. That's super great to hear. I have these discussions with, I teach professional responsibility, so the idea of pro bono is always sort of in the ether in my class. Pro bono is when lawyers work for free for people who need it. And so I'm always advocating for that, but, and mentioning that, for those of you who know, at the law school, we have a letter campaign. There's a student group that receives letters from people in prison who need legal help. And our law students start helping out, start the process. So I'm the advisor to that group. So I have a little insight into what they do. So that makes me when I got here, I was just like, let me in there. I wanted to, because we get these letters and, people need help. The reason, that it's a losing bet to help people in prison. From a financial standpoint, there's caps on what can be earned. There's all kinds of hoops you got to go through. And so there's not a lot of incentive for anybody ever to help someone in prison. And that's why we have the rise of what's called the jailhouse lawyer. The jailhouse lawyer comes about because nobody will help these guys. So some people learn the law. again, Muslims were at the apex of that. Mumia Abu Jamal, Martin Sostre, so many, Malik, the guy I showed, so many people learned the law so that they could help other people. Martin Sostre is a really interesting guy because he talked about pen and paper being like dynamite against Satan, right? Being able to write a writ, to do a petition. And so he was known for creating legal templates, like forms that were already kind of filled out so that other people who had less skills could just kind of do a pro forma. And so so there's been movement on the inside, on the outside. There's been organized and strategic litigation by, religious organizations like the Nation of Islam, and as well as like Muslim advocates and other groups who are doing that litigation. It's, at the same time, let me just say that Elijah Muhammad kind of called it earlier, because he would say, I see we're having a little success in court. Don't get too happy, because this is what got you here in the first place, right? The courts got you here. So you have to temper that hopefulness that you have as well. And, it's just a sort of, it's an interesting thing how you are using like a thorn to take another thorn out of yourself. You're using the courts that, poked you already, and to sort of get out of that situation. So he was a little, but at the same time, there's movement, there's more organization. There's a think tank in DC that does incredible work. And again, there's the students. One of the things I like to tell students is that pro bono is a way of learning the law in a totally different area. And, it changes how you feel. And so I don't think enough law students really get a chance to do that early, until later. But to help somebody, and sometimes, unfortunately, people who are in prison are not supposed to be there. Enough people that it's a critical mass of what you call wrongfully convicted people are in prison. So this notion that forget those people, they belong there, they get what they deserve. I saw it when I taught at San Quentin. People would be like, "So smart guy like you, wasting your time on the," so it's an interesting thing that there's not a lot of help for these people. But I try to let students know that, why people, or why someone's in prison, why do people get killed on the street? It's just sometimes a random thing. So anyway, I hope that's helpful. Thanks. Yes, student. There's a student. Yes. No, you please.
My neighbors who are both snowboarding, I'm thinking about the new topic. There's a bias into the quickly there on top of that, there's bias into the country that there's no good, don't belong or not included in it. How does that idea that
Excellent. No, that's a good question. These are ironies that are hard to get out of. So let me lay it a little bit more. So when Trump first came on the scene and started saying the system's rigged and this and that, how could I not believe that? How could I not fall in line with that, given the number of years I had been studying prisons and looking at our justice system and seeing how skewed it is and how screwed up it is? How could I not believe that? Hell yeah, the system's rigged. So in some ways, that was like, hard to argue with that. So there is that. The thing that really, the ironic thing that I want to sort of highlight is that now that, I've been, and I'm not the first, obviously, there's been people screaming justice reform, Michelle Alexander, Paul Butler, it goes on historically, people who have been screaming for justice, but not so much attention. But now that the former president's in legal trouble, all the followers are like, the justice system's rigged, the DOJ, forget the FBI, like all of the structures that people have been complaining about for decades, Black people and Latinos mostly, right? Complaining about forever, now is rigged. And now, so, these are just sort of, so I guess the takeaway is saying, do nothing there. Go spend your time doing something constructive, because you may be talking to brickheads, I'm not sure, but but these are some of the ironies that I've seen as well when it comes to the criminal justice system specifically. So we can talk later about the specifics. Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. I'll start with the second one, if you don't mind, because it's just easier. The prevalence of conversion to Islam, either in prison or female Muslims in prison, is just very low. I've only been able to see like one study that has sort of done a little comparison. And some institutions, Harry Dammer and some other scholars were saying like 1 out of every 3 African Americans would convert, which is, it's a trite story. Dave Chappelle, everybody makes fun of the person who goes to prison and converts to Islam, right? So that's just a trite thing. It's a part of African Americana. And so there's just not that much there. It doesn't happen at the same rate or volume. So there's very little in the literature about that. The other issue about conversion, that's a huge topic. So just right off the bat, why do people convert? Many people convert to the Nation of Islam and then later convert to Sunni or Shia. It's a common thing that happens. Muhammad Ali exhibited that pattern, Malcolm X, right? And so many others have exhibited that pattern. And so that's one thing to sort of recognize. And some of that has to do with the Nation of Islam spoke to racism in a way that resonated. And so even if you ended up letting that racist ideology, it spoke to you at the time. Remember, like Malcolm X, he thought back and he realized every single person that had wronged him was always white. And so it speaks that racism. But what we find is that over time, the person lets go of those racist ideas, just like Malcolm X did, and enters into a more traditional type. So I call it a double conversion, because they convert once to this type and then convert to another. So there's that. There's the alignment with the power structure with Christianity. And so becoming a Muslim sometimes is also a statement against Christianity. Some of that is there, and I've heard it, and it's true, right? In the sense that, if you want to draw this long history of enslavement and incarceration, we can go all the way back to slavery, and then we can go to the plantation leasing system where we basically enslaved, and now we have modern, prison system. Muslims have been in the center of all of that since the inception. So, the and Christians are seen as responsible for that whole thing, this whole system that we have. The other thing I want to mention has to do with culture. It's a really important part of, at least with African Americans and Latino populations. So I'd mentioned Bilal and that whole, sort of the first call to prayer. But African Americans look at the Moorish presence in Africa and later in Europe as a glorious history. And so because of that history, they go around Christianity. And that's why people like Malcolm X call themselves reverts. I'm not a convert, I'm a revert. I'm going back to our original religion, which is the same thing that Latinos do. Latinos do the same thing because the Moorish presence in Spain for 800 years, Arabic's in the language, people, I know Muslim Latinos who say, look, my last name's Medina. I don't even have to change my name. We're Muslim, and it's like, okay. And even my parents, since I was a little kid, would always say, vamos a ir, ojalá, ojalá, which is a derivation of inshallah, right? May God will. And so Mexicans are running around saying this, not even know what they're saying in that level, but it's the Muslim influence, right? That's there. So when a Latino, for example, starts seeing all the Arabic and Spanish and starts learning about Moorish Spain and starts, sort of recognizing the names among people, that's a real it's an inspiration, right? So it takes you out of the slavery, the colonial mentality. I'm not a colonized being. I'm a part of a glorious past, right? A past that has conquered Christians, right? And same thing with an African American, right? It's like they said, Malcolm X we come from kings. We come from a tradition of literacy, of Arabic, etc. So when you can circumvent the Christianity, but embrace these cultural dimensions, that's a real. So in other words, what I'm saying is for some groups, it's not such an apostasy to convert if you see this within a historical frame. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Right. Mhm. So just to make sure I understand the difference, you meaning because the way I understand the civil rights push in prison is the result of the pushing that's going on the outside, right? So the civil rights activity happening, and so that's Garrett Felber kind of talks about this as well, is that this is sort of an at a certain point people thought, what about the people in prison? And that's where we started seeing, you know, sort of people looking into prisons and thinking about. Yes. Well, I wouldn't suggest, at least, you know, the Christianity was a part of the civil rights struggle, but the Nation of Islam was central when it came to outside of prison, right? Yeah. So, you know, sort of, and Malcolm X, you know, I don't think he would put it this way, but he's often described as a civil rights leader, right? And so he's often viewed as the counterpart to Martin Luther King in the civil rights movement. So it was that buzzing, which included Muslims, which kind of, you know, helped change things on the inside. And the other thing is that, you know, it's very interesting to see some of the litigation. So Martin Sostre, for example, was involved in solitary litigation because of solitary confinement. And for a while, that affected everyone. Mumia Abu-Jamal was involved in medication litigation, and others have been involved in transfer. And so again, these are things that changes the entire, you know, complexion in prison and changes the whole culture. So it's really remarkable to think about all of the changes, you know, that have affected prisons and how different they look from like 40 or 50 years ago because of so much litigation, policy changes, et cetera. So, but that's kind of the way I see it as happening from the outside coming into the prison system. The outside, yeah, on the outside, yeah, I think that's, yeah, I think that's right. Yes. Sure. Mm. Yes. Mhm. Right. Right. So ideally, this question was already worked out in the framing of the Constitution. That's the first thing I would say, is that this question was worked out when the Constitution was written, which was that we have three branches of a government and each was supposed to check the other. But that's not what happens, right? That's not what happens at all. You know, and the only reason all this transfer works in this way is, number one, because the Supreme Court has given prisons the authority to transfer at will. You can even transfer across state lines. You can transfer someone across state lines. And so the court has given the prison this power. The prisons use that power, and then the courts supplicate themselves to the prisons. And so we got cases that are mooted. And meanwhile, legislators do nothing. So if everyone did their role and courts actually challenged prisons instead of working with them, right, I think we would have different outcomes. But what's happening is that they're all sort of bowing to each other, and the legislators are making it more difficult for people in prison. So it's a combination of both. They're working together, and there is just wild animosity against people in prison in this country. Jesse, you brought up the voting. We disenfranchise people who have felony convictions, not just from voting, but from all sorts of things. Like you can't, you know, and it doesn't, your crime it need not have anything to do with voting. So for example, any felony, right, and depending on your jurisdiction, could disenfranchise you from voting for the rest of your life. Jury duty, getting certain loans, getting education loans, where you can live, you know, all sorts of things. We disenfranchise, you know, people in prison such that they basically have to go back to extra legal ways to survive, because we don't, you know, we take away everything they have. And so, you know, the voting is just like the most recent iteration of keeping Black and brown people out of the ballot box. Right now, we're between 5 and 6 million people who cannot vote in this country, the majority of which are Black. So it's working as intended in that sense for oppression. But in terms of the way the division of powers work, the same thing happens in the criminal courts. Defense lawyer, prosecution, you're not fighting me. We make a deal. We come in hoping to make a deal, make a handshake. And the courts, do they challenge it? Do the courts challenge it? No, they just rubber stamp it. Cool, there's a good deal. But that's not what they were supposed to do, right? The courts were supposed to challenge the executive, the prosecutors, the prison guards, the staff there. That's all the executive branch. But it's more like a community work group than adversarial forces. Sorry about that, but yeah, you get the point. Sure. But yeah. So yeah. Yes. Yes. So it's two-sided too. So it's not just you can create a law and change things. Lots of times there are laws already there that don't get enforced. So that's the flip side of it, right? That's the flip side. So for example, back 1800s, there were laws against carrying a gun. No white people ever got stopped for that. So there was non-enforcement when it came to white people, but African Americans were the ones who were, always getting caught on that crime because of the enforcement. So you don't even need to create a new law, just don't enforce what's there already. And that's the same thing that happens inside of prison, is that, guards can do things actively, or they can just look the other way when other stuff's going on, right? It's the same thing. So yeah, I mean, but there is two aspects to what you're raising. No? All right.
A couple times population, a larger population.
Yes.
I'm wondering those, if there's been any conflict or disagreement within those different groups that the state that advocate on their behalf, and if you could just talk.
Great. Was the question I was hoping I get at. This is what I really wanted to talk about, but sometimes, you just got to get through everything and your hands are kind of, yeah. So it's very interesting because historically, the face of Islam in this country has always been black as a historical matter. That really starts to change in the 60s, 65, there's an Immigration Act. We start getting people from Africa, from South Asia, from all over the world, Arab world as well. And so that changes the complexion. So now Muslims are now, African Americans are the minority Muslim group. But all this time, those groups come over and say, like, look at what's going on. Nation of Islam's like, that's not Islam. Those aren't Muslims. There was always this sort of, traditional looking down at these newer, African American groups. The African American groups didn't care because they had a passage to Africa, right? They didn't care about this, but at the same time, it's a very interesting phenomenon because, but for those Nation of Islam, the heterodoxological groups, right? But for those groups who spent time in solitary, got whipped, got shot, but for those people, the Muslim from any other country or from Sunni or Shia or Sufi, they come in, here's your Quran and there's your place, there's your people, there's so they take for granted all of the struggles that, and even right now, Ramadan's still on the table. I mean, it's being litigated in all sorts of, because the rules are not uniform. And so even now that goes on, but, it's incredible because if it weren't for these, heretic, groups, if you want to call them, or these marginalized groups or non-traditional, non-historical groups, if it weren't for those guys, Muslims couldn't come in and enjoy the rights that they have right now in this country, right? And so it's another paradox that happens, through the work. The other thing that your question reminds me of is, well, just who's the subject of my study? If these people aren't Muslim, what am I doing then? What's really going on? And so that was something that, for example, even someone who is on death row in Missouri, Muslim, who wrote to me, I was talking to him about the book, and he didn't like what I was up to. He didn't like what I was up to because he said in the mail, he's like, so in your so-called study, are you treating all Muslim groups the same? And he literally called, are you also including those heretic Nation of Islam people, And so, there's this like sort of, that thing, but my methodology for this book was to treat anyone who identifies as Muslim. So if you're saying you're Muslim, I put the mic in front of you. You're the one who has to live with those consequences, because saying you're Muslim in this country is not an easy thing. Sikhs have been killed for looking like Muslims. So it's not an easy proposition to say I'm Muslim. So if you're willing to take on that, you're willing to do that, then I want to hear what you have to say. And so that was the methodology that I was using for this work. But it's an uncanny thing that, if it weren't for these efforts of the early Muslims who are outcasted by the main groups. So here's a couple of interesting things. The Nation of Islam is like a turnstile. They stay the same size even though they get lots of converts each year. Why? Because those people convert out and join Shia or Sunni groups or Sufi groups, right? So the traditional Muslim populations are growing because of the work of the marginal groups. They are recruiting people who convert to their group, but then later convert to a more mainstream version of Islam. And the last thing I'll say on this is, like, for all of those discussions, I just want to know who would ever step up and say that when Malcolm X converted in prison that he wasn't a Muslim. Who's going to say that? I'm not. Right. Thank you all. Oh, sure. Yeah, of course. Well, the differences that I'm seeing is that, at least from the Sunni presence of this country, it's a different type of organization, and they're working with Sunnis who are in prison who are litigating. Nobody works with the Nation of Islam, and the Nation of Islam has now taken more of a back seat, because when you combine these other groups, even the litigation efforts, the numbers are just dwindling, right? They don't have the same presence, and they're a minority now. They used to be the vast majority in prison. More Science Temple, Nation of Islam, 5% Nation of Islam. Those were the groups. And it's not to say that, for example, other religious groups haven't litigated. Mormons had their, and then Hare Krishnas would litigate, and, you had different ups and downs, but as a consistent matter in the aggregate, Muslims have been overshadowing all of this. But the groups that are out there, ISNA, Muslim advocates, they're working with sort of mainstream. And so it's taken that shift, but it's not to say that there still isn't, like 5%ers are suing right now. They've been suing for years because they keep getting designated since the 60s. FBI designated them as a gang and not a religious group. And so if you just put on hold whether they're Muslim or not, they're 100% religious. They're a religious group, right? And so they're still fighting to obtain that status. So, it's more scattered, and I would say less organized than it used to be from the marginal groups. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that the mainstream groups have institutional help now. There's strategic litigation being planned on the outside. And just to give an example, CARE is greatly involved in litigation efforts and people in prison. For the last 2 or 3 years, they've just gone after the hijab, the covering, because when, a female gets booked into a jail or prison, they'll just yank it off. Everyone's looking around and, make them change in front of other males in holding cells, and et cetera. And so there's been case after case. And so they're about to sort of make it a national rule through the, I'm sure the Supreme Court's going to take up a case and make it a rule because, but that's what they've been doing over the last few years. And they've also taken up Ramadan. Again, Ramadan is just, these prisons are just so difficult sometimes. People are trying to be good and trying to be religious, but, no food in your cell, so you can't eat at night when Ramadan, or we're not going to give you meals at night. And so, it's just hurdles to practice these things. So that's still being litigated right now. But yeah, I would say that the strategy on the outside is being that's being laid out by institutional frameworks, whereas before it was like religious groups mostly doing that. So, thank you all so much. I appreciate your help. Yeah, thank you all. So